Welcome everyone to Hunt the Habitat. A great dog and a shotgun will only get you so far in the uplands. In this podcast, Ann Jandernaw helps us to attain a more in-depth understanding of the birds we love to hunt, their habits, their habitat, and how those change through the year and through the hunting season. Hunt the habitat, find the birds. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Hunt the Habitat with Ann Jandernaw. My name is Steve Blazer, and this is our opportunity to spend some time with Ann and talk about what's going on in the fields and woods. And Ann, how are you doing this evening?
Pretty good. It finally cooled down, which is awesome, but it sort of got messed up a little bit. When I say that, you don't expect in June to walk out the door at 5 to 5:30 in the morning and look and say, oh no, there was frost on the vehicle. It wasn't a horrible frost, so I ran around and poured water on the flowers and everything like that. If it was under a tree, you're okay. And if it was close to buildings, it would seem to be fine. But out in the open, you could definitely see the frost patches. It was white on the lawn, and it was 33 degrees. So it obviously got a little colder than that, but it didn't seem to hurt the plants. That was rather surprising. And then this morning it was like 36, which is really nice temperatures. When you have those types of mornings for training, you usually have about, if you get out by 5:30, you've got probably about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes before the mosquitoes come flying out at you. So I had some people here talking about dogs, and we got through messing with a bunch of pups, and then I said, well, let's just bring out Maestro, and we'll take Maestro to the meadow and over by the woods. We took one step into a little bit of that taller grass, and it's like someone opened a box, and the mosquitoes just came flying up. They took one look at that, and I did too, and I looked at them, and I could just see the horror on their face, and I was like, I think we need to go the other way. I said, we'll do this another time. Because, I mean, it was like a wall of mosquitoes, like, coming up. And I called Maestro, and we headed back. And then everyone decided to go inside at that point.
And that's really interesting because, as we've mentioned on other podcasts, I live south of you. I'm down near Sheboygan, and it is so dry here. And we have zero mosquitoes right now. I'm sure they're coming. Generally, by the end of June, we'll have them. But right now, there's no standing water anywhere other than, some ponds that are low. The creeks are low. The rivers are low. And we're not seeing any of that right now. It's just dusty dry.
Okay. Yeah, the roads here are dry, like the gravel roads. You can kick up pretty good dust around you. But in the woods, some of the first telltale signs if it's dry is anything that's flowering is going to drop its, petals, the flowering part very quick, and you'll see the white on the ground. And I was chasing a pup through the woods, sort of took me on a long trip, and it had gone through an area where there's just beautiful bunchberries, and they were all flowering. And those plants are some of the first indicator along with strawberries, because they don't have deep roots. So if they get stressed, right away the flowering would drop right off. So they looked really good, but doesn't take me much to find some standing water still, and that's still leftover from spring.
That's from all the snow you guys had up there.
Yes, and the rapid melt off.
So you've mentioned two things here. We've mentioned two things here. We've talked about A, you had a frost, and then B, we also talked about it has been a dry spring. Can you talk about those two things and how they may affect the chicks?
Well, dryness doesn't hurt a chick unless it's too dry to affect the vegetation or to not have any bugs. There's plenty of mosquitoes and everything else. In the morning, it's the mosquitoes. In the afternoon, it's the horseflies. So, and then the mosquitoes come back. But really, the vegetation is lush, very lush where I'm at. The small plants are doing good. I mean, the strawberry leaves look great. I mean, because you'd see the edges of the leaves start to dry up a little bit. What we mow looks excellent. Overall, I think it's fine. Now, as far as cold, let's just say that the hen had her chicks and she was down by the tag alders. Well, that's going to be a little bit of a colder area. And hopefully we were all able to fit underneath her wing and body area and just sort of hang in there underneath Mom and be warm. That area is colder than my area. So, so if I'm at 33 and you go down a little bit lower in elevation, how long was it below 32 there? I doubt if it affected many birds because it didn't last that long. Anything that sort of hadn't caught the sun yet, you could see the frost. And this is between 5 and 5:30 in that time. But anything else, it was moist on top. It didn't have the frost feel to it when you would touch it. So in some places the grass did feel a little crunchy, but it didn't last long enough. That's the thing. The problem with frost is when you have it hard and frozen for 3 or 4 hours prior to daylight. So I don't think it was really an issue. And I think the chicks are fine.
Where do they stand? Where are they in the life stage right now?
So just review the first week. Now, some of these chicks, there'll still be chicks being born now that are at the first week because there's always stragglers. So the first week, the process, they have the chicks absorbs the yolk sac, which enables it to go without food for 2 or 3 days. And they're about the size of a man's thumb, the weight of about 12 to 14 grams, or easy the calculation, hold 3 nickels in your hand and you got an idea of what they weigh. But by the second day, the chicks are already trying to eat insects. There's plenty of mosquitoes for them. And by the third day, they're feeding on their own. The young chicks will feed on insects because they are developing flight feathers. And the flight feathers, they need a high protein diet. Obviously, then it's the mosquitoes or some other bug that they fancy. Then by the second day, the chick can jump, as we were surprised, over 6 inches off the ground. And by the end of the first week, the chick's gone from a coat of fluffy down to having some of the primary and secondary feathers that are actually quite developed with, and then some of them can be 2 to 3 inches long. But they're still going up to the mother to seek refuge when it's cold. So now those that are now in their second week, within the first day, the brood will have moved about 3 to 4 miles, possibly, seeking suitable habitat. They just don't stay in one place. And she sort of herds them. One goes over this way and she clucks at them, and then another goes this way, and she's just trying to keep them all going in some direction. Then the hen will lead them to what's termed as the brood range. And by this time, these little chicks have got more feathers, so what do they start to do when a chick gets feathers? They dust. They're actually trying to dust. And this past week, I saw a grouse dusting alongside the road. And that was sort of cool. And then between 10 and 14 days, these chicks are going from being able to jump 6 inches to being able to have short little flights. So it's really rapid development. What helps that rapid development is the intake of protein. And at this point, the male chicks are now 8% heavier than their female sibling.
Now, a second nesting. Well, let's say a hen loses a brood, or, it just gets too cold or washed out or whatever. What's the timing on that then? So now the first nests are, if they haven't hatched, they're about to hatch. They're pretty darn close. What's the time frame on second nesting?
Well, there's no time frame there. It's basically, if it happens, it happens. But it's not like quail and some of the other species that are really more documented about it. I mean, Gillian talks about that there's been evidence that there's been broods that show up later in the season and could most likely be a final successful nesting of a hen who had possibly lost her chicks earlier. But then after the hatching, the brood and the hen, they remain together for basically 16 to 18 weeks, which is approximately about the middle of September. So he talks about one time back in, I think it was 1982, the hunter found a living day-old chick and brought it in to him. It was a September 20th.
Oh, my. Wow.
Oh, my. And this is in his book, The Grouse of the North Shore. And so the hunter actually brought in a small chick. And like he says, if there ever was evidence of a second brood, there it was right in front of him. And the egg would have had to have been laid in the middle of August.
Wow.
But he suspects that this particular hen had lost her clutch of eggs. But the problem is, even with a second brood, there's not really an advantage in the renesting because of the length of time it takes for the maturity. So think about the renesting. If you had it in July, you're looking at you need X number of weeks, and where does that put you? Toward the end of October when they're going into November. They don't have enough time to acclimate into their role of being independent, of finding all the things that they need. About the time they need to be feeding on certain things, the bugs are gone. And about the time they need to be feeding on something else, the leaves of the aspen have already, it's totally out of sequence of what the process of their life that needs to match with the sequence of the development of the habitat and the food sources that they need to go from the hatching to the brood range to then eventually dispersal and then to the winter.
Those late birds are at a huge disadvantage.
Absolutely.
Changing tracks a little bit, we had a question from a listener, and it's something very basic to grouse hunting. It's a fascinating subject that you talk about a lot, and it's the importance of aspen. And could you go through that a little bit?
We talk a lot about aspen. Aspen this, aspen that, hunt the aspen. So, but really, when you look at the map of the aspen range of North America and then the map of the rough grouse range in North America, you could almost take them and mirror them right over the top of each other. And that's pretty actually unique. And one of the things about the aspen is the uniformity of large pastures of cover. When you think about it, the aspen, it's one huge even age cut. Predominantly, it regenerates very evenly. Soil compactions and dip in elevation, like if you drop into a little pothole area that might collect water. But typically, it's pretty even across the board for these birds, which is really important. And so when we think about aspen, the grouse do the best when they're in a specific habitat that's both diverse in cover and in height, as well as providing a year-round food source. And aspen has really been noted as one of the primary habitats for these birds where population densities can reach a maximum number of breeding pairs of grouse. And a lot of this has been documented through Gillian, Bump, and Edminster in the research that they've done. However, when you have grouse that are forced to live in pocket areas of smaller pockets of even age cover that gives them what they need, the successful rate of populating an area rapidly diminishes because it's too small of an area. It's like the fox in the hen house. Pocket cover that is not very big does not allow for expansion. You're going to have those that have security, but you very quickly put the rest of the group on the outside edge in very marginal habitat very quickly. When you look at it, the males need roughly 8 to 10. The brood range is around 25 acres. The hens need around 44 acres in the wintertime. When you look at that, you got multiple males that they'll traverse through the wintertime. So these are bigger patches. These are what I talked about, the corridors. So if you have one drummer, he's able to stay in this one area, but there's not enough extension of his area that's quality habitat. Where are you going to go with the population?
Is there an ideal or a minimum size of a cut that we should be looking for? Is 20 acres too small? And I think, we've all listened to you enough to know that a lot depends on what is adjacent to the cut. But are there some guidelines that we should be thinking about as we look at cuts and say, okay, that's 18 acres. It's too small.
Okay, what's the minimum of when you think about what is the minimum? The males is 8 acres. They can at least survive in that. And from there on up, you can start adding birds. But you can't go below 8 acres. So you're basically looking at anything that's not good quality habitat is marginal habitat. And the chance of predation increases immensely. When I do my sorts for looking for prime habitat, it's 8 acres and up. Sometimes I'll throw in
Okay.
some 7 acres because maybe they find some woodcock possibly in those particular areas. And I know there's been a few people who say, well, we want the really small cuts. You barely get your dogs out, you barely turn around, and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand if those smaller acres were next to a bigger acre, because sometimes birds get pushed into those little patches and everything like that. But it's the thing that, you have to look at the grouse's needs, and it starts with 8 acres and it goes on up from there. And that's basically what I'm looking for, is I start at that and then I work on up.
Okay. But if we're looking for a concentration of birds, we probably want more than 8 acres. Fair statement?
You want more than 8 acres. 8 to 12 acres is basically the Bale's home range. He can have 8 to 12 acres and be right next to another patch right near him and probably be okay. But sometimes you see these patch cuts out east, and they're like 8 to 12, 8 to 12, 8 to 12, and it looks like a grid of 8 to 12 with all the more mature habitat all around it. Well, you're making a fox in a hen house cut, basically, is the way I feel about it, because you have so much edge. If you took and put all that area together, you would keep the marginal habitat on the outside and give more room for these birds to move around under the safety of the canopy of the aspen in a larger cut. And so that's what you're thinking about is, okay, a cut that's 25 acres. Now, here's the thing. You can have a hen that has a brood. In early season, I had a 15-acre cut that I could, and even to this day, I could still go back in this one area and still find birds. And it's a small cut. The cut's gotten junky, but there's stuff next to it that now they're in it more late season than they were early season. And there's other cuts nearby. But they still wander a little bit into this one area. But it was when someone would say, well, cripes, there's 15 acres and I just found 6 birds. Well, you found chicks. The chicks can't stay there that long. They're going to move out. And I knew there was 2 drummers in that area. One had decent habitat and the other one had 2/3 great decent habitat, and the other habitat wasn't that great. And so, and then one hen, she raised her brood right near there. And, it's how much pressure do they have predators? How much habitat do they have that's secure for them and their food sources, and how far do they have to travel for? But you look at where you find them.
Sure.
And every time you see an area where you find multiple birds, you should imprint it in your mind what it looked like, what time of year. You check the crop, and you don't remember where the flush is. You remember where your dog started to point.
That's a great point. I don't know that most of us think that way. That really is a good point.
Yeah, it starts with the point. It starts where the dog first doubled back. And what's really interesting, if you go in there a couple times, does your dog consistently find scent in a certain area? Obviously that tells you they like to hang out. And a lot of times you look at the dog and how intense is the dog. So let's say you go to a cut and, you do have to give cuts breaks, and take a break from things at times. You basically look at where the dog is picking up scent. And if every time you do this and it results in one flush, you probably got a male. But if you think of it this way, when you have a bird and you're tracking it with a dog and the bird is out ahead and the dog casts left to right and it keeps locking up almost in a straight path, many times that's one bird in front of you. But birds a lot of times will travel in a little group. And sometimes at the last bit before they get to an edge, one might fly, another one may shift over, or just hold and wait. But sometimes you're shocked at when you get toward the end of an area and the cover's going to run out, how many birds actually can fly out of a patch. And you didn't realize that you were pushing that many birds, so to speak. But the other factor is what probably would have told you when I look back on stuff like this is that the intensity of the dog never changed. And then many times we'll become a lot more cautious. And when the bird flushes, many times they'll just stand there and keep holding, and you're thinking, why are you still standing there? Well, there's more birds.
There's still scent there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the scent is just as strong. It's not changed.
And I managed to pull you away from the importance of aspen. I'm sorry, because it's such a fascinating topic, looking at the size of cuts. But what else do we need to know about the importance of aspen?
Because aspen is one of the keys that we look for. If you have a sugar maple clear cut, go look at the ground floor. There's really no plants in a sugar maple cut on the ground floor. You can kick the leaf litter around and it looks like something would be worm bedding, which might be better for your woodcock. But you don't have really a fern understory, the small plants in there, because it quickly gets shaded out. But you go to aspen, the leaf litter breaks down, you have the small plants in there, you have a whole different world under that cut for these birds. It's pretty neat because they can reproduce by seeds that are produced by the flowering catkins, or they can sprout along the main root system. And it can grow on a variety of soils ranging from heavy clays, sands, into shallow rocky soils. Many times a good aspen stand can reach a maximum potential on well-drained loamy soils. These soils will also contain high organic matter. So that tells you about the breakdown of the leaf litter and the breakdown of the trash after the logging event. So it really is a nourishing type of a soil to produce such a high, fast regeneration and almost an even regeneration of the stand that comes back in. Think about how even most of these aspen cuts are. The other part is it's known for really rapid growth, and the trees grow fast with a high nutrient demand. So they're very demanding of a soil to meet their needs to be able to, in turn, grow very quickly. The weather will also affect the regeneration of aspen and doesn't like compacted soil, and harvesting techniques and all that will affect the growth rate. Say someone goes and is harvesting when it's too wet. They then compact the soil, and then you don't have an even regeneration on that soil. No different than the headlands of a farm field where the tractors turn around or the combine turns around or the truck turns around. That has less yield potential on the headlands where they turn around versus where they go back and forth between one headland to the other headland and turn around. So I don't know if that makes sense to people, but the headlands do not typically yield anywhere near the regular rows do. On sandy soils, they're a little more low in nutrients because there's a leach effect. It's like, think about when water gets on sandy soil, it drains very quickly. So if the water is able to drain very quickly, then the soil nutrients also drain off very quickly. And so many times on sandy soil, you will see not as good of an even regeneration of aspen. When you have lack of nutrients, lack of rain, you also a lot of times get a die-off when there's not enough food to support the aspen, so it becomes thin. When a hen moves into areas like this many times forces the hen to move the brood to another area searching for food and better cover, which anytime you have to move a brood a distance, you take chances of losing some of the brood. Besides the water leaching through the soil, these stands are usually stressed very by droughts or even by tent caterpillar infestations, because when you don't have enough nutrients, they don't have enough to sustain themselves to grow into mature trees that are, hardy. In a young stand of aspen that's typically like under 1 to 3 years of age, and that depends many times on the latitude, it doesn't possess enough canopy. So with these young stands, you have spotty canopy, you're going to have grasses that are way too tall for chicks, and what you're waiting for is for the maturity of the stand to eventually close in that canopy. When it closes in, it's going to kill off the weed and the other plants that are really not essential to a grouse. you end up with those smaller plants of what the grouse needs. In the older aspen, so you've gone from the regeneration to the young stands to the older edge, it has a natural thinning area. How many times have you walked through an aspen stand, you put your hand on the tree and you about fall over? It naturally thins itself. And it's like whichever tree can make it to the top first, it overshadows whatever's underneath it, and then that one's done. So that's how a stand opens up. And typically thinning usually it can occur around 15 years. Now, I was in some aspen stands up in Maine that were 18 years old, and they looked beautiful. But that's farther north, not a different growing season. When those trees fall over or they open up, then your weeds a lot of times come back in. And about that time, you'll start to see some of the shrub component come in. The other cool thing about aspen is they have the suckers that produce off the main root system, and that they'll develop new roots that are about anywhere from 15 to 16 feet long in as little as 10 weeks. Right weather, right soil. But that's when you get an even canopy. When you look at an aspen cut, and it looks very even, look at the soil, look at the floor, look at the plants. And if you're finding the signs that you need to see for the grouse or your dog's birdie in those areas, look at the density. All this stuff that you need to be looking at. It's not just the dog and you're walking through the trees. At least I don't. I'm looking at everything. I'm looking for any sign that I can find. And so the soil is going to dictate the quality of the stand. You cut the old aspen tree, and say you were in a grove of aspen that was like not that great. You had aspen and you had to go a little ways to another bigger tree and another big tree, 100 feet apart, 70 feet apart. Not very many trees. Well, you don't have a big root system. Then that root system is not going to overlap each other, forming almost like a grid, which then allows multiple suckers to come up. So you're going to have open areas to begin with. The better the stand prior to the harvest, the better the next regeneration and density of the aspen cut.
So if they let a stand get too old, and I imagine, I don't know what age.
That typically doesn't happen because, then it's someone that's not paying attention. What it is that it's typically a soil issue. You'll see this in sandy soil, where the trees are sparse between each other. And it's not where, every 15, 25 feet there's another tree. It's more like every 50 to 75 to 80 feet there's another tree. Sometimes that happens in sandy soil or poor soil or gravelly soil. But you get that nice soil that's got a little black in it. It doesn't have a lot of black topsoil, but it's not all rock and it's not all sand. It's a nice mix with some clay. You get a nice even grouping of trees coming in. And when you have that, their root systems go out typically a long ways out in what they call like the drip line. Drip line is the outer edge of the trees where the water comes down from the leaves. So a lot of times the tips of the roots from other trees are interspersed. So think of it like a mat. And so when these trees are cut, next thing you know, you've seen aspen that is in a row. Tree after tree after tree, that's coming off of main root system. And of course, there's lateral root systems that come off of the main root system. Those typically aren't quite as big because that main root system coming into the main tap that goes down, that's the main funnel, that's like the freeway for food nourishment. And everything else is little arteries going off. They're not as big. They're smaller, like a 2-track going off the side of a main road. It's the best I can describe it. But it's really important. So the better the root system of the old tree that got cut, the better the regeneration of the next stand that comes in.
Okay. A few minutes ago, you talked about tent caterpillars. That's a bad thing, right? That's a problem, correct?
Yeah, it is. They're nasty. Infestation of, they call them army worms or tent caterpillars. they can cause a decline in the grouse population. What happens is they take all the canopy off. So you can actually hear them in there. And what you're hearing falling is the droppings from the tent caterpillar. It's obnoxious. And there's an area as you go up north of Bruce Crossing, and it's just before you get to the Ontonagon River, and you drop down there, and it's actually on the right-hand side. It seems like year after year after year, there's tent caterpillars in there, and I haven't figured out why, and I can't quite get to that spot. I think it's on some commercial forest land, not federal land. But every year, every place else seems to have leaves that are decent in this about half a mile to 3/4 mile stretch at some time through the year in the summertime. All of a sudden, that doesn't have leaves. And it just, from a distance, it looks like tent caterpillar issues, but they'll defoliate the aspen, which then in turn allows weeds to take over the forest floor of a nice aspen clear cut, and it can take place for 2 or 3 years in a row. And so it keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. So what if you're a hen with a brood in there and this is all happening? Everything above you is unraveling. Now the food source on the ground is changing. Oh, I got to move. But she keeps moving and there's just more tent caterpillars eating. She's got to get someplace to get into decent cover. And sometimes those tent caterpillars take it away, defoliation. So she originally has a nice lush food environment. Now it's being overtaken by weeds and raspberry canes. So this limits where the hen can raise the brood. And then at that point, she has to take the brood into another area. So it does change it a lot.
Okay. And have you seen this in northern Wisconsin recently?
I saw 1 or 2 tent caterpillars, and I've seen 3 tents. Not happy.
Okay.
I don't want to see any.
They're not.
So
they don't occur in isolation, is what I'm hearing you say.
No, I've seen 3 so far. I'm watching, but I'm just hoping it's just a fluke.
and I've seen them before. I've been up in northeastern Wisconsin camping in June, and all of a sudden, they're everywhere. Is this a cyclical thing?
Yeah. You can't say that in X number of years that this is going to happen, but it typically at some point happens. So I'm going to jump back a little bit to the male aspen. Now, these trees are male and they're also female. So the male aspen bud is the key winter food for the grouse, basically in the colder parts of North America. And they have a bigger bud than the females do. The females are actually nutrient deficient. They just don't have the same carbohydrates and they don't have the same amount of fat. And if you look at the seasonal usage of aspen, so in the spring, they're using the flowering catkins. In the summer, they'll eat some of the leaves. They'll also do that in the fall. In late fall, they'll eat the buds of the aspen. And in winter, they'll eat the buds of the aspen. So aspen's being used throughout the year for grouse.
So to kind of summarize, let's see how good of a note-taker I am. When we talk about the importance of aspen to grouse, and that doesn't mean you won't find grouse other places, but in terms of population density, aspen provides a unique combination of shelter, protection from hawks, from owls, etc. You've got the right combination of plants on the floor that grouse like to eat. There's insects in there for the chicks. And then come winter, you've got the buds that are available for them. So it really provides a lot of air year-round.
Right. And the key to the takeaway from this is that not any old aspen's going to do. You need to know the age of the cut. Otherwise, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time of the life of that aspen. And the density will be off. It's sort of like it's too thin, or it's too thin and too much weeds, or the canopy's uneven because you have thinning going on, and you need to find it when the canopy's very consistent. So, and the one thing too is like the male aspen bud, let's just say compare it to clover. In carbohydrates, clover is 2.8 grams, but the male aspen bud is 14 grams. When you look at fat of clover, it's 0.2 grams. You look at the male aspen bud, it's 6.5 grams. And think about that for the winter. In protein, the clover is 1.6 grams, and the male aspen bud is 6.4 grams. So there's a lot of nutrition there for the grouse in the colder climates.
And just backpedaling a bit to talk about the age of the cut. And I'm going to put in a shameless plug for your app and the fact that we still have to put eyes on the cut because, as you said numerous times, not all cuts are created equal. A 12-year-old cut in one place is not as good as a 12-year-old cut in another spot. And it has to do with soil, it has to do with moisture and all that. But seeing the age of the cut gives us a starting point, and it gives us, because you're looking for that combination of density. The stem density has to be heavy enough to protect the grouse, light enough for them to get around, though. And the canopy has to be just right to allow the amount of light necessary for the floor, but not too much, again, because you're looking at protection for those birds, correct?
Right. You can go and look at imagery, but even imagery on different soils doesn't look the same. You're looking at 8 to 16 years of age. And not everyone's going to be good at reading imagery or want to take the time to do it, when they could look and see, hey, here's the date of the harvest, and you can be 20 hours away and go plan your trip. What the age of the cut is. Otherwise, you're left guessing whether or not your first time out, am I going to walk into the right cut? And if you know where the cut is, you know where to start. But then you also, on the same token, you got backups in case you get blocked out.
Right. Well, blocked out, or you just get in there and it's not what you expected to see, and but that age of that cut and being able to see what's adjacent to it gives you a fantastic starting point. So hopefully we covered some of what the listener was looking for, and the importance of aspen in the grouse life cycle. And you are training puppies right now.
Yep.
And you had a very cute story to tell earlier, but first talk about where you are with the rest of your puppies.
The puppies are doing well. We've had finally some beautiful mornings that you could get out and train that was cold. They're casting nicely. They're stopping on scent. They're working the scent. And I had this one little pup named Hootie. Now, I didn't name him, but the owner should be very proud of Hootie. Hootie showed his tenacious side today. Now, the dew was very heavy on the trees this morning, and if anyone's been in a young clear cut, especially early, you bump into a tree and it just showers you. And the poor little bugger, when we got back, he was cold. But he found the scent of the quail. The quail decided it didn't really want to fly. Part of it's molting a little bit. And so the quail does one pop up in the air and then takes off. And every time this doggone quail felt threatened, it squawked and then jumped up and ran. But it ran underneath all this ferns, and it was starting to get covered in moisture, which isn't a good thing. So the pup is casting around, tracking. When you watch this pup circle out, come back, and keep narrowing those circles down more and more, and then back and forth, back and forth. And the whole time, it wasn't about eyesight. It was about his nose, tuning in on less and less scent. And every time I'd get close, the doggone quail would pop up and squawk and go off. And sometimes that happened when he'd have his back to it and he'd whirl around because, of course, the noise. And then he'd have to start casting again. So it got to the point I finally got a hold of the little bugger because I didn't want him to catch the quail. We had gone a long distance. I finally scoop him up. He's bawling at me, squawking and thrashing because I had taken him away. Now, this tracking was almost 10 minutes.
How old is Hootie now?
Hootie's about 20 weeks old.
Okay.
And Hootie was very, very tenacious he was very upset at me, just thrashing because he did not want to get picked up and taken away from this. Finally, I got him over it, and I was eventually able to put him down. But I typically come out in one area, and I didn't show up where I went out. I came back down the driveway with this pup and everything. But Hootie did one heck of a job trying to find that quail.
Someone's going to have a really nice dog there.
Oh, he's got the idea of what he wants, but boy, he does not want to be picked up and taken away from it. Yeah, Hootie did a really great job today, and the rest of them did too, but at that point, I didn't want to get any more quail out. I mean, he really took me on a run for that quail. And it wasn't like he was running all over the place. He was working the scent. It was incredible.
If you don't mind me asking, I'm going to ask a little bit about, you picked the dog up before it caught the bird. Okay. Now, we have all known guys that train their dogs, and they'll actually pull the flight feathers off of a quail and let the dog catch it to increase prey drive. Talk a little bit about that. I know that's a little controversial. There's different feelings on that.
Well, you need to evaluate the pup as whether or not you want to take that chance.
Okay.
I already had a pup that's cautious, and that was respecting the scent.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want him to learn that he could catch it.
Thank you.
Okay, this pup is cautious to begin with. He's a little slower on his casting right now versus the other ones. They're doing a really good job, and he's doing a good job, but he's never going to be this type of a dog that's going to be a speed demon. He's going to be a thrill to hunt behind. Hootie's going to be. But he has a cautiousness. He thinks. If a dog could ever think, Hootie thinks. Hootie is like, I don't know if I smell something. Let me think about it. Yep, I think I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me go find it. And you can just see this sort of wheels spinning in his head. And at this point, you have a pup doing everything you want it to do. Why would I want it to catch something and go backwards? Because then I'm teaching it that it can do something and get the bird in his mouth. And why does it need a shotgun?
Yep.
That's when the dog will start to leap in the air to try to grab the bird. That's when the dog won't respect the scent and stop. I've had it happen where a dog accidentally catches a bird, but when that happens, I take the dog off of birds for quite a while, and we just work scent. There's nothing to catch there other than to point the scent.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to break that. And I will not go back to where it caught that bird. We'll actually go to a whole different area. So there's nothing that triggers a memory and that it could repeat a pattern. So you have to break the pattern. And I think it's up to other people. Some people like that. I like a balance of prey drive with cautiousness.
Which kind of describes a grouse dog, really.
Yeah, it is. That's what you need in a grouse dog. You need one that knows that the scent's going to be taken away from him, knows that the scent's going to lessen, and knows that that's just part of the game. Because if they always have the same scent X number of feet out and winding it, you only have to do that about 3 times, and that's what they expect from there on out. They're not dumb. It's shocking how quick any pup picks up a pattern. And the more hyper they are, the only thing you're going to get away with there is that if they're hyper, a lot of times they won't pick the pattern up quite a bit because they're not focused at all. They're too excited and being in la-la land over tearing around and everything and not thinking. And I do honestly believe dogs process things. But the more hyper they are, the less they can focus. The less quality training time you're going to have with a hyper dog. There's just different things you have to do. Hyper dog, you won't want to put it in a kennel next to another hyper dog. You're going to put it about 2 or 3 pups down and put it on end where there's no one on one side and there's maybe 2 on the right-hand side. So the left side is the end of the kennel, and on the right side, there's maybe 2 dogs that are not wound up.
Okay.
So it has good examples right next to it.
So you took this conversation in an interesting way, and
maybe I didn't answer what you wanted either. I don't know.
no, you kind of did. Yeah, absolutely, you did. But you went into talking about hyper dogs. Now, some of us have those. Okay, I've got one Llewellyn who is a pretty mellow dog, and I've got another one who's just busy. I don't know how hyper she is, but my father-in-law used to call her a physic woodpecker. I mean, she's just all over the place. And if we have, let's say we have that hyper dog, okay? Because we don't always get to choose. We choose our puppy at 8 weeks, and we have what we have, okay? It's a member of the family. So we're going to do the best we can with what we have. What can we do to help that dog focus when we do get it out to train? Are there some things we should do first? Should we heal it a little bit? Should we do a little wool work? Are there things that we can do with a hyper dog to help prepare it to learn when we begin a training session?
Well, first off, all that needs to happen even before training. The training starts in the home, not out in the field. And I'm going to probably say some stuff. For some people, this is going to be very difficult. But young children that are screeching really loud and running and tearing all over, unfortunately, with a very young puppy, what's it going to do to the puppy? It's a part of the group. And I'm not down on children, but you better find yourself a more laid-back pup to go with that type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because with a puppy, it's monkey see, monkey do. I'm in on the fun.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And I think one of the things, too, is when you greet your dog, what do you allow to happen? I mean, my dogs are not perfect, so don't think that I'm just trying to pick on other people. I mean, you come in here, I allow my dogs to give hugs. Okay, now, it's hard for the dogs to understand that everyone doesn't want hugs. I warn people before they step through the threshold of my kennel that my dogs give hugs. But let's just say you have a hyper dog at your home, and you make sure when you give a command as best you can to have that dog's focus on what you want. Sometimes with a hyper dog, it's sort of bouncing or looking around. And all you gotta do is snap your fingers and draw his attention right to you. And don't snap your fingers off to the side. Do it in front of you, right underneath you, chin, so that it's drawing it to your face. So you're going to snap and do that. And I want to do is break its attention on other things and focus it back to me. You try to limit outside influences. You pick and choose your battles of when you're going to give commands as best you can. Calm, precise, and make sure you have the dog's focus. Because you can take a hyper dog, and a lot of times you just have to, if you see it get hyper, you have to go and sometimes do a timeout with it at the house. Some dogs will get themselves so hyper that they just run a frenzy until they collapse. It's like a child. What I tell guys and gals to do is take them, put a crate in the other room, put a blanket over it, put a fan in front of the crate. Not that you have to blow it right on the dog, but blow it up a little bit, and maybe even stick a clock or a radio. This is timeout time. And I will do timeout with my dogs. Okay, you guys have pushed it too far. We're shutting the whole thing down in this timeout. And so you keep your voice calm. You don't have the inflections, the high-pitched inflection in your voice. And you keep it calm and steady. And think of what triggers that dog to get hyper. And if there's anything you can do to minimize it, you try to minimize it. And even like with young children, bring them in on the training of that pup and explain how you want that pup to be a good citizen, to be a good member of the family. And bring them slowly in on the training. I remember one owner called up and he said, "You wouldn't believe we've created a monster." I said, "What?" I was expecting he was going to say the pup. He says, "No, my daughter thinks she's trying to tell me how to train the puppy now." And he says,
you get
she's
that girl
actually,
a shotgun and get her out in the woods, okay?
yeah. She was only 7 years old.
Okay, time to start.
Yeah. And so he says, she's actually done a really good job. But he says, the only problem is the puppy will listen to her and it won't listen to me now. That was funny. It's getting the focus on yourself, getting the focus on your voice and the levelness of your voice.
Okay.
Don't create outside distractions away from your body. With hands, if you're going to do something with your hands, try to be direct. But a lot of people have dogs that have to burn off energy. And before they get into the woods, one of the things I've told guys is find non-productive habitat area and let them run. Let them burn some energy off there where they're not going to find any birds or anything and get the edge off of them. That's something that you can do before you get into the place that you want to hunt, because you already will have the edge off the dog. That's what I do. I think healing a dog going into a cut, the anticipation just keeps building the longer you heal them. Because it's like having a Ferrari that's idling. It's really a constraint for a dog to want so bad to be in there, and it's like it's so close, and sometimes they just bolt once you release them. But if you can take a little bit of that edge off of them and, like, say, run them in hardwoods where you're not going to typically find anything, then you've got some of that high energy level off.
So let's say, though, that we're going to the training grounds. Okay, and let's say we've got that dog that needs a little extra focus.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we pull up to the training grounds, and maybe there are 4 or 5 or 6 other trucks there. Maybe it's a bunch of friends that get together early Saturday morning to do some training together. There's pigeons, there's quail. Okay, you just pulled into the parking lot. Dogs are in their kennel in the back of the truck. Are there things we can do with that dog to help attain focus for that training session?
I've never driven to a training grounds, but if I drove in, this is just my gut instinct, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent or whatever. I'd go to the other end of the lot and put my dog away from everyone and put it away from that scent. I'm doing everything I can to control the situation better.
Right. Okay. Maybe if we have that kind of dog, maybe that group training type of situation is not a great idea.
That type of dog, typically, even if you run it with another dog, you're going to ramp it up because those type of dogs are typically competitive. They're not all competitive, but typically they're competitive. I can outrun you. I can outdo this. And next thing you know, I outran you. Where'd the dog go? But those are all things that people need to look at, and don't have the total answer for you for that because I typically just go out my door. Yeah. And typically when I know there's people coming down a trail, what I've told about the stories, I disappear back into the woods. Mm-hmm. And then everyone goes by and I'm back onto the trail after they've gone around the corner. I've been doing that since I've been a teenager.
Naturally shy, Anne.
No, I just like to avoid situations. Typically you meet someone and you don't know what the dog's like. It's not shy so much as like, I don't want to deal with it. It's easier for me to just go fade into the woods.
Hey, Kit, we have covered a ton of ground this evening.
You think?
I want to close with one very important question, okay? And this has been bothering me a lot.
Oh,
those of you that have listened to these podcasts will remember a story about a drumming grouse. Anne, have you seen Charlie?
No, he's on vacation now.
He's on vacation. I'm worried about this fella.
Oh, don't worry about it. They all disappear about now. I mean, I get calls from people and they say, where are the birds? Where are the birds? Are you seeing birds? Are you seeing birds? And it's August. I mean, it's the heat of August. End of July, heat of August. I said, well, they're in the swamps. What do you mean they're in the swamps? Have you been in the swamps? I didn't know. I'm not going to go in the swamps. There's too many bugs. Well, why aren't you looking for them? I said, because there's too many bugs in the swamp. And Charlie's taking a break. I mean, he went on vacation. I don't know where he went. He did his part. He waited all winter, went through that horrible spring, and he says, the heck of it, I'm going to find someplace else. And that's what they do. They hang out, but that log, they know what's going on around that log, but they're not on that log.
Okay.
They're in that area.
Right. I shouldn't sweat Charlie. Charlie's okay. He's in Park Falls having a beer, and he's keeping an eye on his log.
He's doing something like that. I mean, actually, he's probably at the Dead Squirrel Tavern. There actually is a tavern named Dead Squirrel.
Some of you did not hear this, but about 2 or 3 episodes ago, Anne took me on a little journey, and there was a grouse drumming on a log. This is the short version, but 15 yards from the road, and we got some nice videos of it, and she named him Charlie.
Well, it's better than one time I was guiding some guys, and he shot the grouse, and I told the other guy, well, he shot Mildred. He goes, what? I said, hey, here it is. Hey, you just shot Mildred. And he goes, what?
Well, do not shoot Charlie, okay?
No, I don't plan.
You leave Charlie alone. So.
Well, if Charlie has a problem, as long as he doesn't get out in front of a log truck, we'll be fine.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great note to close on here, and thank you for.
What? You mean running over, being run over by a log truck?
No, the fact that Charlie's okay. He's at the Dead Squirrel having a beer, and he's checking out his log every now and then.
Yes.
All right. Everybody, thank you very, very much for joining us, and join us again next time. And always remember to hunt the habitat.